All right, let me pull up. This is Chapter 6 Notes, Part 1. We're going to be talking about types of muscles, skeletal muscle functions, and major skeletal muscles. So back in Chapter 3, when we did cells and tissues, we talked about our 4 main tissue types, with muscle being one of the 4. We had epithelial, connective, nervous tissue. Muscle was one of them. We had 3 main types of muscle tissue. We are going to talk about the differences between those 3 different types of muscle tissue. However, this chapter is going to focus on the function of skeletal muscles. So like I just said, we're going to focus on skeletal muscles in this chapter, the anatomy and arrangement of skeletal muscle cells, functions of skeletal muscles. We're going to look at the microscopic anatomy and physiology of muscle contraction, which I think that this chapter can be a little difficult just because we're dealing with a subcellular level, but I think there's some really good animations to help you. I'm only going to have you identify some major skeletal muscles, and you'll need to know how to spell them, and we're also going to be looking at major muscle movements. So basically, long ago, you've got these, ripply guys with muscles, flexing and things like that. And, observers felt like when people were flexing their muscles and they could see, tone and definition underneath the skin, that it looked like a mouse was trapped underneath the skin and moving. And so the part of the word mus actually means little mouse. And you've got over 600 different muscles in the human body. And I'm going to make 26, which isn't so bad. And again, we've got our 3 major types of muscle tissue. We've got skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. So here we go. Skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac. We're going to look how they're similar and also how they're different. Well, how they're similar, they all are involved with contraction. They all are involved with movement of something, either to propel the body, to propel blood, to propel fluid, food, feces, urine, babies, and all sorts of different directions. So in this, it's showing we've got skeletal muscle that is here in the muscle of your arm. That's your biceps brachii. We've got cardiac muscle that's coming from the wall of the heart, which is the myocardium, and then we've got smooth muscle, which lines the walls of hollow organs like your stomach. And if you look at them, they all have a dark purple thing. Well, that's a nucleus, so they all do have a nuclei. However, if you look at skeletal muscle, they have multiple nuclei, so we call that multinucleated. If you look at cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle, they've got these kind of zebra stripes. Well, that's called striations, versus smooth muscle does not, hence it's called smooth. Smooth muscle and skeletal muscle are more elongated, versus cardiac muscle is not. It's short and it's branched. Another specialization of cardiac muscle is that it has these things called intercalated discs, which are special gap junctions, which are membrane junctions between neighboring cells' plasma membranes that allow cardiac muscle cells to share information so that the heart can contract in unison. All right, so they differ by where they're located, and again, this is talking about skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle. They differ in where they're located in the body, their cell structure, kind of what I just talked about, and how they're stimulated to contract. Are they voluntary or are they involuntary? So our skeletal muscle is the only one that is voluntary, and the other 2, cardiac and smooth, are involuntary. But they're similar because they all shorten or contract because of myofilaments. So if you can do a float back to chapter 3, we talked about organelles, okay? And cytoskeleton was an organelle. And cytoskeleton was involved with the movement of cells. It was the bones and muscles of cells. Well, crazy enough, skeletal muscle cells and cardiac muscle cells and smooth muscle cells, because their job is movement, they're literally full of cytoskeleton. Like, that's really the dominant organelle inside of them. And they're made up of microfilaments, which are called actin and myosin. And we're going to get into some more terminology. It can be a little confusing, but we'll get there in a little bit. So within a muscle cell, we don't have microfilaments or microtubules. We have myofilaments. You also will see MYS referring to muscle and sarco. Sarco means flesh. All right, so skeletal muscle tissue. So oftentimes you'll see skeletal muscle cells referred to as fibers because they're super long, okay? They're found all over the body. They are multinucleated. They're pretty large cells. They're striated. What the striations are the organization of cytoskeleton, all right? So it's this combination of myofilaments, okay, or microtubules. We have a thick and a thin filament, and the arrangement of that thick and thin filament give rise to the striations, okay? Skeletal muscle cells can vary in size and shape. Some of them are long, some of them are circular, some of them are angular, okay? They can contract really, really quickly. I call them hungry hippos with oxygen because they're super, super needy, and they do need breaks pretty often. They're kind of like sprinters. They get tired really fast. They're not going to be, you know, slow and steady like other types of muscle in the body. So here are skeletal muscle cells. So this is a muscle cell, and this is a muscle cell, and this is a muscle cell. And you can see these stripes or striations. And basically the skeletal muscle cells are so full of cytoskeleton that it pushes all of the other cytoplasmic organelles and the nuclei to the outside, pushes them out against the plasma membrane, which, believe it or not, the plasma membrane in a skeletal muscle cell has a different name, and that's called the sarcoplasm. I'll apologize if you hear Sophia singing in the background. She is singing at the top of her lungs. Okay, so speaking of skeletal muscle cells, we're going to talk about generalized skeletal muscle anatomy. So you can't see me right now because I don't have my camera on, but I'm making a muscle. I'm flexing my biceps brachii. Okay, probably everybody knows where their bicep is. All right. So if you look at a bicep muscle, okay, and we cut that bicep muscle in half, we can find some distinctive pieces, and we're going to identify the anatomy of a muscle organ. So biceps brachii would be one organ in the skeletal muscle system. The triceps brachii would be another organ. So one muscle itself is an organ, if that makes sense. Skeletal muscles are a combination of connective tissue and skeletal muscle tissue. The connective tissue gives them structure and strength, all right? There's some connective tissue sheaths, 3 of them, okay? We've got the outermost one, which is called the epimysium, and if you think about the word epi, it means on top of. The inner one, the innermost one, is called the endomysium or endomysium. You're going to hear, you know, a lot of different pronunciations of things. So we've got epimysium, endomysium, and then we've got paramysium, okay? That's in the middle. And all of these words really don't make all that much sense, so I'm going to go on to the next slide, but this is just giving you some definitions of what these things are. So the epimysium, paramysium, and endomysium or endomysium, paramysium or epimysium, what have you, are connective tissue sheaths that are bundling up a skeletal muscle, and they're there to provide structure and strength, okay? A tendon is what the epimysium actually kind of turns into, and a tendon is going to connect that muscle to bone, which is its anchoring point. A fascicle is a bundle of skeletal muscle cells. And again, this will make more sense when I go to the next slide. All right. So here's a bone, okay, just kind of a generic bone, and we're looking at a muscle, and this muscle has been sliced in half, all right? So this is the outermost area of the skeletal muscle, and it is covered with a connective tissue sheath called an epimysium. The epimysium is connective tissue, as I just said, and it will blend into the tendon, which will then attach to bone, all right? As we cut open the skeletal muscle, we're going to notice little bundles, okay? And these little bundles are fascicles, all right? So we're going to pull out one fascicle right here. A fascicle also has a connective tissue sheath, and that connective tissue sheath around the fascicle is called a paramysium. If we look inside the fascicle, all of these individual little circles are individual muscle cells. So we're going to pull out one of these individual muscle cells. Now, what's around, all right, you can kind of see it here, all right, what's around this individual muscle cell or fiber, remember muscle cell, muscle fiber are synonyms, is another connective tissue sheath, which is called an endomysium. So we've got 3 connective tissue sheaths. Epimysium means on top of, endo means within, peri means around, okay? So you might just think that that's the oddball out in the middle. All right, smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of hollow organs, like the stomach, the bladder, and the respiratory system. And these cells are elongated. They only have one nucleus. They have no striations. They're involuntary, and they contract very slowly and continuously. I think of them like long-distance runners, like somebody who's running a marathon. They're just kind of go slow and steady, slow and steady, slow and steady. They also have a specific arrangement, okay? They come in 2 layers in most places. Actually, in one place in the body, they're in 3 layers, okay? And they have an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer. And we'll look at this in class, the arrangement of it. But those 2 layers alternate in their contraction and relaxation, and that's what causes peristalsis. So here is an actual slide, and then here is, a graphic of what it looks like. So this is the inner layer, where the cells are running kind of like you're seeing the side of them. And then this is the outer layer where you're seeing the tops of the cells. All right, so these are all the little circles kind of looking down. And they alternate in contracting and relaxation. And that's what, again, causes peristalsis. And then finally, we've got cardiac muscle tissue is only located in the heart wall. Specifically, it's called the myocardium. And it's responsible for making the heart contract, which will then create the force to push blood throughout our body, okay? Cardiac muscle cells are uninucleated. They are striated, so they have that specific orientation of their myofilaments to give them a striped appearance. They're involuntary, so we don't think about them moving. And they're arranged in a spiral or chain-like pattern. And again, they have the specialization of the intercalated discs, which are those special gap junctions that allow neighboring cardiac muscle cells to, if they're going to receive, well, you're going to learn in this chapter, they're going to have to receive sodium. And sodium is going to cause them to contract. And so we do not want one part of the heart contracting where the other part's not contracting. We want things to be contracting in unison, and that's what the intercalated discs cause. All right. So here are our cardiac muscle cells. Again, they're short. Okay, they're not long like skeletal muscle cells or smooth muscle cells. And then these are the intercalated discs, which are those special gap junctions in between the cells. And that's just another picture showing these intercalated discs. So our skeletal muscles, again, we're going to focus on that in Chapter 6. 4 major functions. So they help us move. All right, we've got this frame of bones that we just learned about. We've got muscles that attach to bones, and they move our frame, okay? Our muscles, even when we're not using our muscles have tone to them. You've probably heard of that, all right? Some people may feel like they have more tone than others, but your muscles are partially contracted at all times, and that's what helps you maintain your posture to stand upright. They also cover joint surfaces to help stabilize them so they're not easily dislocating. But another function of your skeletal muscle system is to produce heat. I said earlier that I called them hungry hippos, and maybe you know what that game is, maybe you don't. That was a great board game in the 80s. But they use a lot of ATP, so they use a lot of glucose, they use a lot of oxygen to generate ATP, and a byproduct of producing anything, as we know, is heat, okay? And that excess heat that's produced helps us maintain our body temperature. All right, so we're not in class right now, so we're not going to do this section. All right, so that's it for Chapter 1 notes.